Okay. Hi, my name is Brian Hendricks. Today we'll be going over some bones, some muscles, some layers of the skin, or actually all the layers of the skin, and the layers of compact bone. So I've introduced myself. Let's go around the room, make sure that you can see that I don't have anything out that will allow me to cheat. As my wife slowly pans around the room. Maybe she can pan a little bit faster. All right. And if you want to look at my papers on the table, there's no writing on them. But I am a horrible artist, so I was not going to try to draw the compact bone or the layers of the skin. The only writing on this paper are just 1, 2, and 3s, and that's just because I went over it 3 times before actually doing this. All right, so let's get started. We will start with the skeleton and some bones of the skeleton. We'll start on the back, work at the top of the list. We got the cervical vertebrae, which is C1 through 7. You got C1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, followed by the thoracic spine, which is T1 through 12. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Followed by the lumbar spine, which is L1 through 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Followed by the sacrum, which is also broken up into S1 through 5. 1, 2. Oh, this one doesn't really show it very well, but it is technically broke up into S1 through 5. And the coccyx. So we will mark these off on my paper. We did the cervical vertebrae, the lumbar vertebrae, the sacrum and coccyx, and the thoracic vertebrae. Before we get to the skull, we'll go over the bones on the list that are not associated with the skull or the spine, which is the sternum. Protects all those vital organs in there, your heart and lungs, along with the ribs, which also help protect. And if you just give me a second, I'm just making sure there's no other bones that I need to cover that are not related to the skull. Which they're not, so we will check off the sternum and move on to the skull. For the skull, we have the frontal bone, we have the hyoid, which is actually would be right in here somewhere. I don't know if it's actually truly represented in the skull, but it is right there and it helps support the tongue. We also have the mandible, the lower jaw, the maxilla. We have the nasal bone, which is actually broken up into 2 bones, 1 and 2. We have the optical bone, which is actually not in the eye sockets like you would think it would be. It's actually this bone back here. You have the parietal bone, which if you want to come up top here, Kelly. The parietal bone is right here, 1 and 2. It's 2 separate bones. From there, we have the sphenoid bone, which is that little bone right there. We have the temporal bone, which is this bone here. And the zygomatic bone, which is that bone right there. That covers the skeleton, the skull. So now we will move on to the few muscles. Which technically the diaphragm is a muscle, which it's kind of hard to represent the diagram in a muscle picture, but it would be right under here in that cavity where your lungs and everything else is under your ribs. We've got the diaphragm. You have the external oblique muscle, which are these muscles here. External oblique, like I said. And then you have the rectus abdominis muscles, which is your 6 or 8 pack, or in some people's cases, a keg. Rectus abs. And the last two muscles to talk about is the sternocleidomastoid muscle, which is right here. And it runs from your cervical spine to your clavicle. I'm not going to try to spell that. Sterno muscle. And then you have the trapezius muscle, which is this muscle all in here. Runs up right under your skull, down to the mid-back. Okay. So that covers all the muscles and the bones. Now we'll move on to the skin and the layers of the skin. So the three main layers is the epidermis, or in this picture, the epidermis, the dermis, and the hypodermis. So, epidermis, dermis, hypodermis. The epidermis consists of 5 layers. The 5 layers start C, L, G, S, B. You have the top layer, which is the cranium, followed by the lucidum, followed by the gastrolosum, followed by the spinosum. Oh wait, sorry, granulosum. Granulosum, not gastrolosum. Okay, well I'm not gonna respell it. Granulosum, spinosum, and the basal or basale. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct. So, the cranium, the lucidum, the spinosum, or granulosum, spinosum, and the basal, or basal. You have keratinocytes, which are living in these layers. As they move up to the cranium, they are what becomes your dead skin cells that flake off. At the bottom of the epidermis are melanocytes, right in here, and the basement membrane, which separates the epidermis from the dermis. The dermis consists of the papillary layer, the P layer, and the reticular layer. The reticular layer of the dermis is where sweat glands live, and they have a channel that goes up all the way to the top of the skin where you have sweat pores, where sweat comes out. Big part of what sweat does is help thermoregulation in the body, to keep the body at homeostasis as far as temperature is concerned. And at the bottom is the hypodermis, which is under the dermis. The hypodermis is where the blood vessels live, veins and arteries. And last but not least, we got the compact bone, which this is not the best picture, but it was the closest one I could get. And like I said, I'm a horrible artist, so we're gonna go with this picture. So you have the posterium, which is the outer fibrous layer of the compact bone. Within that layer, you have the circumferential lamellae. And within the circumferential lamellae, you have osteocytes, leucanae, and canaliculi. And within the circumferential lamellae, you have osterons. This would be an example of an osteron. An osteron has a central canal that runs up generally through the middle of it, from what I can tell, and it houses also the blood vessels, which are the arteries and the veins, as well as nerves, which there's a little thin line here that shows a nerve in that central canal as well. All right, that is it. I hope I got it all right. I know I didn't pronounce it all correctly.